Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Jada McKenna, and I have the honor and privilege of moderating this session this morning. Before we get started, we will start with a scene setter that will really help put us right in the middle of what our conversation will be this morning.
We don't have rain as before. Farmers don't have enough money to have irrigation system, and this is very difficult for them to practice agriculture in such condition. So my work is to provide them training about soil conservation management so that they can have more knowledge about how to face those problems.
Unfortunately, where water levels are decreasing, farming and herding communities have to travel longer distances to access these natural resources. And in the pursuit of these natural resources, they come into contact with other users, in many cases lead to violence.
Cuando nos dijeron que teníamos que salir, bueno, incluso en mi comunidad ya se empezaba a llenar de agua, a inundarse. Muchas casas se destruyeron con las llamas. En mi comunidad hubo el 70% de casas que se destruyeron. Amigos míos murieron en las llamas.
Thank you. Once again, welcome. I'd like to quickly welcome my panelists. To my left here, we have Elizabeth Hausler, who is the founder and chief executive officer of Build Change USA. She also happens to be a Schwab Foundation social innovator. Then we have Patricia Espinosa, who is the executive secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And then Alan Belfield, the chairman of the Arup Group in the United Kingdom. For those of you watching online, if you plan to share anything about this session through social media, I'd like to encourage you and remind you to please use the hashtag WEF22, so hashtag WEF22. The video was a great way to start this because it really brings to life the challenges we have today and the realities of climate change and how they hit those among us who are grappling with the double threat of conflict and fragility and who are most vulnerable. Climate change affects us all, but does not affect us all evenly, and I hope that video brought to life what that looks like. The latest IPCC report estimates that climate change adaptation in developing countries will cost $127 billion annually, and 14 of the 25 countries most vulnerable to climate change are also afflicted by conflict, weakening their abilities to adapt. The drought unfolding in the Horn of Africa is a primary example of this. The region is experiencing its third, it's actually going into its fourth today, drought event that it's supposed to take place every 20 years. This is the third in a decade. We've had 3 seasons going into 4 seasons of no rains. And this current one is looking to be the most devastating in a generation, with over 15 million people in Ethiopia, Somalia, and Kenya currently experiencing extreme hunger. Over the past decades, we have seen growing commitments to mitigating climate change, but efforts to help communities cope and adapt from them have been far lagging behind. In fact, we think it's just 20% of climate finance is going towards adaptation versus mitigation. And in fragile contexts, that is even more stark. We think that just 1% of climate finance goes to the top 10 most fragile countries. And that is where it's needed the most, because that is where climate change and climate disasters have the most dramatic impacts, because climate itself inflames the drivers of conflict. So it is a cycle, unfortunately. Addressing this and ensuring the most vulnerable can survive and adapt to this current change, it's very inevitable, will require all of us, government, private sector, civil society, innovators, and entrepreneurs to step up. And I hope it gives you some thoughts on how your organizations may step up, or you can give us advice on how we can encourage others. And before I turn the questions to the rest of the panel, I'd like to introduce our panelist, Hindu Umara Ibrahim. Did I pronounce that correctly? I didn't have, yes. Hindu is the president for the Association for Indigenous Women and Peoples of Chad. So thank you very much for being here. So I will open off with a question to all of you, and we can start with Elizabeth. I'll start closer and go down. But what actions must donor countries, national governments, humanitarian and development organizations, and private sector actors take to support the development of more climate resilient and inclusive solutions for the world's most vulnerable populations?
Thanks so much, Jada. It's great to be here, and thanks so much to the World Economic Forum for putting this topic on the agenda. It's such an important one. If we're going to talk about climate change adaptation, we have to talk about climate resilient housing. So what actions must we take? For me, it's just three simple things at a very high level: shift control of capital, change policy, and listen to and put the power in the hands of the people. Build Change is an 18-year-old social innovator that has helped to protect and make more resilient $2 billion of housing infrastructure assets around the world. Now, this is Davos, so I'm throwing out that number because if I was a private company and I had $2 billion of assets under management, you would probably be pretty impressed. But these are $2 billion of safer houses that are owned and controlled by homeowners themselves. So this is what I mean about shifting control of wealth. So we also, I want to illustrate a little bit about how we get there. How do we get to this point of disaster resilient housing? We do that by bringing different types of financing together. So philanthropy, government funding for subsidies, multilateral lending, private lending. There's a mix of philanthropy that really has to come together to solve this problem. Let me give you an example of our work in Colombia, where we've been proud to be a small part of the Casa Digna, Vida Digna program. It's an innovative, first of its kind, nationwide campaign to improve existing housing to withstand earthquakes, which are not caused by climate change, but addresses the whole house. This program has channeled several tens of millions of dollars from the government itself into upgraded, better private housing. And it has most recently leveraged a $137 million loan from the World Bank. We cobbled together $2 million in philanthropy to break through the bottlenecks that, quite frankly, the public and private sector couldn't be bothered to break through themselves. So things like developing a building code for housing in informal settlements, improving technology to register folks and move them through the process. Has anyone here ever gotten a building permit? Do you know how difficult that can be? So now it's a lot easier to do that in Colombia for individual housing. Certainly, there are a lot of stakeholders here. We were just a catalyst to make this happen. We showed it could be done by getting on the ground, working directly with homeowners to strengthen their houses, and then to take those lessons back up. So this approach can be replicated around the world, but it requires this mix of financing, philanthropy, private sector, multilaterals, and government.
Patricia?
Well, I would also echo the point about the importance of having adaptation here on the agenda of the World Economic Forum, and I really hope that it will grow over time because it's still not so much in the center of the attention. And there's really an enormous need of people from government, from private sector, in the communities, at all levels of government, to really understand that everything that they plan, every project that they put in place should go through the lens of climate change and resilience building. So that means, on the one side, for example, and the Paris Agreement provides us with one tool, which are the national adaptation plans. National adaptation plans that integrate all efforts into one strategy. That is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, we can have very important and valuable efforts, but if they are not integrated in a medium and longer term vision, the impact that we need in order to build resilience will be limited. So, however, if we look at the reality in fragile states, if we look at the fact, and the video has made it very evident, the fact that, for example, of the 25 most vulnerable countries to climate change, 14 of them are also affected by conflict. If we look at that reality, we need to understand that we have to support countries in building those plans and in implementing them. I was just, last week, I was in the Maldives, one of the countries that is really in the forefront of climate change. So if the Maldives does not get support from the international community, it is really going to be a very difficult situation. First of all, they are really at risk of soon losing their land, at least part of it, very soon. And second, also their viability. So also investing in adaptation and looking at building resilience has to do with investing in a peaceful world, investing in prosperity, not only for those countries, but also overall. We don't need more conflict around the world, and we know that these situations, these effects of climate change, lead directly to conflict.
Thank you, thank you. And the Maldives really brings that home as well. Alan.
Thank you, Jada, and thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. And that video really set the scene very well, because it really showed the urgency that we need to approach to answer some of these questions. And we already know, I think, that together we can actually make a difference. I think, governments, humanitarian development organizations, but in particular, I'm here to try and say the private sector should be involved as well, and we should be making a difference there. We are seeing more funding through the adaptation policies, but I don't think it's just a funding issue. We need funding, clearly. But actually, I think action needs local knowledge and delivery networks on the ground. And that's the problem, of course, when you work in the most fragile environments. And I think that's difficult to do. And to solve that, my panelists are probably much better, in a better position to do that than I am. But from a private sector, I think we should be aligning our expertise with these local communities, with the people that can help on the ground. And it's probably better that we do that when we're not in a crisis. But, we always are in a crisis, so that's one thing that we ought to work on. I think it's something we could do better to establish those networks. Equally, I think some of the institutions could look at leveraging the expertise that we have in the private sector. We employ many people from all around the world, many organizations do, many from these countries, many from the fragile states, with good knowledge and good networks. And I do think we should be reaching in and using those and bringing them back out, probably more formally. Finally, I think we really need to attract the investors and the potential investors. Investors see this as a risk. And I think this is something that we need to do more of. And we need to actually explain the massive upside that there is, as well as a financial risk. There's a massive upside to reputation, to attracting talent, to wanting to shape a better world, to solve the problems that are there. And that upside needs to be explained. And we almost, I think, need to actively seek out and work with investors over a longer period. and not just wait. So I think that that should be something that together we ought to be doing more of. I think that will come down to building trust, developing an inclusive agenda, tailoring the programs to reflect the real challenges on the ground. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I think together we can make a difference.
So, listen, I'd love to hear your perspective from this, on this.
Sure. Thank you, and sorry to be late running from one event to another one. But I'm so happy to be with all of you in this panel, and also joining the two voices saying having adaptation in Davos agenda is so critical. I come from Chad in middle of last week. And when I start being in Chad, 3 days before, we have one rain season. And then we were so happy because the rain come back. In 2 weeks, there is no rain. So that means for us, we are sure the food insecurity is going to be in the agenda. So there is no doubt. The water issue becomes so critical in some countries in Africa, where camel who used to drink once every 3 weeks to 3 months, just once, camel start dying. So it is a big alarm for us as the communities. Desert is advancing 4 kilometers every year. Imagine, maybe by the end of my lifetime, my city in Jamena will be in the middle of the desert. So of course we need adaptation. We need resilience for the communities. But what we need, how we are going to do it, we wanted to have the adaptation fund to be doubled. We wanted to have not only the commitment on funding around adaptation, we wanted to see the cash in the tables where the peoples, the communities can access it and they can build their own resilience. And we are not asking that as charity. We are asking that because we deserve it. The developed country use the natural resources to become rich. We are all on the same level. We understand that. Because the richness didn't come from the sky. It's come from the natural resources that we are extracting. So it is the time to give back to the nature. And giving back to the nature, it's giving back to the peoples who are living and protecting this nature. I give you the examples. I worked 2 weeks ago with an indigenous women groups. So we got a land titling for them. Land rights is so important for an indigenous woman because when climate change impacts the community, the man leaves the community to look for another job. And the women who are left behind, they don't have a land right, and it is often sell it by a small money or steal it completely. So we need to ensure that they get the land right properly. And when they get it now, what they are going to do in agroecology, to restore the ecosystem, replant also the indigenous trees, and replant the food that they need. And we put like a small water there to do the irrigation because we know the rainy season is not sure. So those kind of projects are concrete. They need money. It is not the money that we have to pledge on it. It is the cash in the tables who can change the life of the peoples, who can protect the nature. So this is the resilience and adaptation we wanted to see now.
Let me follow up on that, because I think the theme of this conversation is the need for partnerships to make this work, for all actors to step to the table. But we also know that the communities that are affected by climate change themselves usually know the best solutions to adapt to climate, but yet those who are impacted usually have the least amount of voice as to what will happen. What are some suggestions or things that you think we need to do to change that dynamic so that these women that you're meeting with, that they have, as powerful a voice at the table as the government officials, as the private sector official, as the NGO coming in?
Right. So those communities are not only victims. They are solution makers, they are champions. So they have a lot of traditional knowledge that they are using to build their own resilience. And I can give you some of the examples. So we know with all this climate change, the kind of crops that we have to plant during the rainy season who is very short or who is not certain. And that can give food to the peoples. And peoples know exactly where is the water point when they live they walk kilometers and kilometers to get access to this water. And we know that because we learn from the nature. We live with nature. We understand the behavior of the animals. We understand the position of the cloud, of the stars. We guide ourselves not by GPS, but by the moon position, by the star position, where we are going to heading. We follow the sound of all the trees. This trees speak, actually. You have to know that. And we follow also the sound of all the birds. So those traditional knowledge are oral. So they are in the storytelling. They are passed through the generation. So how we can do to protect those knowledge in order to protect our environment, to build the resilience and adaptation is so important. So we need to have the addition from the science, from the technology, and with the traditional knowledge. I'm doing that also in the community by building a participatory mapping. So I need a satellite image. And I need the technology from the cell phones and from the drones and with the community who didn't went to school because they do not speak French, English, or they do not write, but they have those knowledge. So you put those scientific and technology with them, they put their own knowledge. So it's allowing the oral knowledge and storytelling to be transferred to the next generation and to be transferred to the other communities living with them in order to build the resilience, not only for us, but for all the rest, even for you who are here. When we protect a tree, we protect a river, is going to protect the atmosphere that protect the peoples even in Davos.
Elizabeth, do you have anything to add on how you engage communities in the work and in the process? You have these big investors, you're running this big portfolio. What does that look like for building change?
Yeah, I want to pick up on this conversation about women, right? Because women are disproportionately affected by climate change, yet they can be fierce, they are fierce, incredible stewards of their family's safety. They can be superb construction supervisors, visionary CEOs, coders, finance experts. We've got all of them on our team. So what I think we need to do to ensure we're investing in climate resilient housing is put the money in the hands of the women, enable them to make their own decisions about, what's right for their family. So we have we work in the Philippines where we estimate 70 million people are living in houses that are vulnerable to the many hazards that affect the Philippines. But there's no loan product on the market that works for home improvement. So we've co-developed a loan product with microfinance agencies who are lending primarily to women. 90% of their clients are women. There's no collateral required because they're already customers. They're already proven to be credit worthy. That we've innovated on making the loan product more attractive for a home improvement project. And so this is an incredible way of reaching women who can make their own decisions about what's best for their family with an access to financing that they can really make work. But it's not the point. It needs a large-scale wholesale investment of both debt as well as technical assistance funding. But someone needs to be open to taking that risk, to being able to lend to these microfinance agencies that then can lend on to these consumers who have proven themselves to be credit worthy, but maybe from an international view, maybe don't look so much. So we need the private sector to be able to take those risks and put that money out there into those channels to reach the end user, the homeowner.
I mean, Alan, you said it best. You said the private sector needs to be involved. We need to be at the table. You talked about how we have to show them the upside. There has not been as much investment in adaptation as we would have liked to have seen. Can you talk to us about what's driving that, or what the private sector needs to see from us or from other stakeholders to really get more involved in adaptation where it's most needed?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing is I think it's changing, and it's changing dramatically. As we've just said, the fact that COP27 is going to have adaptation as one of its major themes is absolutely brilliant. And it suggests to me that that's going up the global agenda everywhere. If they're going to do it at COP, they're going to do it everywhere. But of course, we're talking about environments that have the most challenging environments to do the adaptation work. And there are places that, how would I describe it, that don't always have the robust institutions and governance that finance people normally want, yeah? that they normally run away from. So the risks for the institutional private sector look quite high and be quite difficult to overcome. But they can be overcome, I think. And I think we all appreciate how much work is already going into there. But some of the things that might be easier is that you would find it easier to get the private sector involved if the projects that we're involved with were less of a risk, they were less bankable, right? So the projects that we normally talk about getting are, we need $50 million, please, or we need $20 million, please. Whereas I think if we could start with projects that are around the $1 to $5 million claim, that actually really play into the hands of using a local community to solve the problems, put the money in the hands of the women, as you just said. If we can look in the £1 to £5 million range projects, I think we'd have a very different outcome from the private sector and the way they manage their risk.
We still need to get to scale, though. Would you think governments or others can help with de-risking instruments for the private sector?
Clearly can, and I think they do need to step up to that.
Sorry about this. Why we are talking about risk? That's the thing. The risk is in our life. We are dying. People are dying. We are not breathing. I mean, there is even a food insecurity everywhere. There's flood everywhere. Why we are talking about investment that can get benefit? I mean, if you are not living, you cannot get benefit. So just to walk from the risk away and invest with the trust that what really we want from private and public sector.
I couldn't agree more. I think it is trust that we have to build up. I completely agree with that. Yeah. And I do think that this is about building trust. And I just think it's easy to build trust with the local communities, with the people on the ground to do this.
Yeah, and their network of partners like INGOs and governments and associations that can help with that process. Patricia, you mentioned, it's a good segue because Alan just mentioned COP26 and COP27, the adaptation conversation, I think really got started there. And now with COP27, you have it firmly on the agenda. Thank you for that. Can you talk about what opportunities do you see for us to further press this issue about the need for this kind of adaptation work in conflict areas? Like, what are things that you would encourage all of us to do in the lead up to COP27 to really help make that case so that it shows up strongly there?
Well, first of all, let me say that, yes, the Secretariat, the UN Climate Change Secretariat has been working on adaptation forever, yes, right? It's one of the main pillars of the climate change regime. At the same time, the reason why adaptation came so high in the outcomes of Glasgow was really, we need to thank the very strong voices from the vulnerable countries, from the island countries that were clearly saying, look, we are not going to go along if the adaptation is not duly taken into account. And yes, out of Glasgow, we got a number of mandates on adaptation or calls on adaptation. One of them, for example, is the doubling of adaptation finance, which, by the way, I mean, it was very good. It was a breakthrough, the first time that something like that was approved. But at the same time, if we think about the fact that in terms of the, if we take the 100 billion pledge that has not been fulfilled, and out of those, until now, there we can say roughly 20 billion are being destined to adaptation. That's not enough. Even doubling that is not enough. But okay, we need to start somewhere. So when you say, what do we need to do? Really, we need to push for that doubling of adaptation finance. That is one very, very specific thing. Another point that came out of Glasgow was to launch the work on a global goal on adaptation. We have had forever also, we now have very clearly a goal for mitigation that is related to the 1.5 degree that we should not really go over that. But in terms of adaptation, really making calculation globally of what are the needs in the world is absolutely critical. So we need to support that process. And let me tell you, very frankly, there are resistances to that. Just last week, when I mentioned the meeting in the Maldives, I was there. The minister launched the discussion. She wanted to have a discussion at political level so that that meeting could give some guidance to the negotiations and to the more technical work. Well, none of the developed countries were represented at high level. So that's an indication. That's an indication about the resistance. And I do think it is important to put it in this in the terms also that Hindu was making. It is really about the world's stability, the world's well-being. It's not only about those communities. The other thing is when we talk about the national adaptation plans, we need to strengthen that. So far, we only have 35. We know that many countries, over 100, are working on that. It is very difficult because also adaptation needs vary so much from one country to the next. And the context, the political, social, economic context in every country is different. So it's really a very hard work to put together an adaptation, national adaptation plan. We need to support that work. We need to also help countries with capacity building. I hear more and more from especially the smaller countries, the island countries, we need capacity building. We don't want anymore the consultants that come, do the work, and then go home, and then we really want to build capacity in our countries. So that's big piece of work that we need to do. At national level, we need to do it also really in an inclusive manner, including indigenous peoples, of course, including all the communities, because they know best what are the needs, what are the possible solutions. So it's work in many different aspects and at different levels.
I want to go to see if there are any questions or comments from the audience, but just a quick follow-up on that. Alan talked about the need for that trust and relationship building to kind of begin to think through that investment process. Is there room for the private sector in the creation of these national adaptation plans? Or is there anyone helping to broker that?
Yes, of course. That would be, that is the...
I think that's a good way.
Yeah, that might be.
And I think people are, to be fair.
Okay, yes.
I think there's a lot of work being done in the adaptation space, just not enough of it.
Yeah, just not enough.
Just
Exactly.
nowhere near enough of it. And it's you know, we do some work, but again, not enough. You know, we've helped with some of the waste management strategies for across Africa for the World Bank. We work with Oxfam on some of the WASH program on using digital and GIS to put in the hands of the locals. You know, even simple things like training people to construct in bamboo and that sort of stuff. Lots of things done, you know, fire strategies in shelters, technical guides for wind, asking MSF how to use solar-powered electricity for their operating theatres and their pharmacies, etc. But it's tiny. You know, we've done that, we do all that, it's tiny and we should do much more. But I think it just shows the opportunity, though, for the private sector to get involved and to see the upside. And that's what I think we should be doing much more of.
Showing that. Would anyone, start here and then go back to Durham?
Adam Cahin from Rios Partners, Social Innovation thought leader. I've heard all of you talk about the need for collaboration between government, private sector, and civil society. And people say that over and over here in Davos. And I'm not understanding what are the obstacles to that? Why is that not going as quickly and at large a scale as it needs to?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, no, I really think it's a translation issue. As someone who came from the private sector and now is in the INGO sector, there's different language, there are different timelines, there are different ways of working together and different approaches. And yeah, I think there needs to be that commitment to do it in this way and to really work together. But they aren't, it's not a quick and easy 1 or 2 meetings. What's your experience? I see.
Yeah, so as coming from the community, that's why also we still need the international fora, like climate negotiations or maybe here in Davos. So it is the platform that can allow it, accessibility of putting representative of the communities or of the civil society at the same tables, the business, the government. Because you cannot access them. We can do that when you come at the international fora, because it is the place where you can access your minister who is in charge of implementing the adaptation, or a private sector who is also acting in your land or in another land for the benefit. But when you go back home, imagine that an indigenous person going to knock in the door of the minister saying, we need to come in my community and sit down and talk. It's not like imaginables. And imagine that an indigenous person going and knock in the door of the private sector, just saying that we know that you are working in this area and we wanted you to come and talk with us about investment in our land or about our right. So there is a lot of limit in this level of where we need the implementation. So that's why we have to shift the discussions and to have those kind of platform at the national level. Because we talk only at the international level, but we need the implementation of this talk at the local level. So if there is anyone who wanted to help to create this platform, we really wanted to have it. UN, yes, you can tell me maybe UN at the national level can do it, right? But UN at the national level, when we talk to them, they have these barriers of they have to depend from the government. If the government allows them, and then they do not have right to tell government, hey, you guys, you need to sit with the community, and then you private sector, you need to sit with them. So it is the government role who can call the private sector, call the UN, call the indigenous communities, and call the others. But they are not doing it. Why they are not doing it? Because the community are not empowered. Because it is community who are voting for the government. So if the community who vote for government is empowered, and then they just tell the government, we wanted you to sit down with us, and we wanted you to call the private sector, they will do it. So that's why we need to invest on the community, and then the community can play this role.
Yeah. Do you want, oh, sorry, go. Oh.
Yeah, I think it comes down to incentives and demand. So every party here needs some incentive, and there needs to be demand for whatever it is. Someone has to, in our case, want the house to be safe, right? So I think about the 4 parties involved here: the public sector, the private sector, the end user, in our case, homeowners themselves, as well as civil society, or in our case, the social innovator. And there needs to be incentive for everyone to play the game. So in our case, in Colombia, the top-down government implemented and made a priority resilient housing, so it has to be a priority at the policy level. We brought in private sector partners, Autodesk, who is an expert at BIM tools, building information modeling, and worked with them to integrate this into some of the government systems. There is an incentive, there's a market incentive for them to play the game, to be in part of this. And then homeowners, in our case, the end user, what's the incentive to have to turn your house into a construction site for 2 months and move out? Well, we have to make it easy for that to work. So everyone in these parties needs an incentive to be at the table, and they also need to want to be at the table, whether that's wanting their house to be better, or looking at a market opportunity, or fulfilling the mandate from someone more senior in their government. So we have to have that policy leadership, and everyone needs an incentive. We work with a lot of people think that if they just enforced a building code, it would all be all right, right? And that is a very short-sighted view. That's a stick approach. And what we've found in our work on resilient housing is that carrots work a lot better.
Yes, on this, what I would say is it is really a very, very complex process. As Indo was saying, you need to look at different levels of government. So imagine there is a government at the national level of one political party that then needs to work with the regional government of a different political party, then with a different level of the community, with Congress, with the parliaments as well. So the political conditions to put in place this dialogue needs to be there. As well, in terms of the communities, there are sometimes very tense relations and very difficult relations to really sit down and make this dialogue. But I have to say, there are some very important and very good examples of this kind of very participatory plans. Not necessarily on adaptation, but for example, the national climate action plans, the NDCs that are presented to the Secretariat on how countries will be reducing emissions. Why? Because it's also going to affect the private sector, it's going to affect the communities. There are some extraordinary examples, so we can learn from that. But I would say the political realities are probably the ones that make it more difficult. However, if there are incentives and there is really clear commitment by the communities, by empowered communities, by the private sector, by the financial sector as well, which, by the way, there was a call also for the first time in Glasgow that the international financial institutions should really align all their policies to Paris. So if we have that, it will put really a lot of pressure on that on the political actors. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Right now we're running out of time, but I did want to make sure that you got in, and even if we can't all answer it, we can follow up. Please go ahead. Oh, okay. So, okay, go ahead.
Thank you. My name's Jeremy. I'm from Seychelles, a big ocean state, a big African ocean state, small island developing state. I think going back to the question around trust and I think getting the private sector involved, I mean, we just passed the 20-year mark of the UNFCCC. I'm sure in those 20 years, there has been projects led by communities in at least some of those 25 countries that we've talked about, and especially in those 14 countries that are afflicted by conflict. Has there been mapping that has gone and shown us who are the partners who are delivering? I think we're talking about sometimes not just the conflict, but the issues around institutions and corruption. So have we found people who are delivering, and are we then putting the trust back in them? Because I think that's what's very key. There are partners who are delivering, so are we going back to them?
Yeah. So we are out of time, so I do encourage, if there are examples or compendiums of those, to please let's follow up and do that. Thank you for coming today. I mean, I think the key that we talked about here is bringing people together, but also being aware of the power dynamics and making sure that we are bringing together the right people in these conversations. So a couple of key takeaways were around the national frameworks that are being developed and the support that's needed. And I think as citizens or as actors in different countries, really understanding where countries are in those national frameworks and making sure that they are inclusively being developed in inclusive ways. Empowering communities, really putting that at the center of the work in some way, and making sure that they're represented and at the table and have had a voice and things. That's actually just good business and good sustainability. And also just thinking about, government cannot do this alone. Governments or NGOs, we cannot do this alone. We do need investment from the private sector. We do need the skills and the resource they bring. So really thinking about incentives, risk mitigation tactics, or other things that other partners can provide to help increase that investment. Look forward to continuing this dialogue. I hope this was thoughtful, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done.